Hey guys, this is Tommy and Kimberly from Ravens Creek, and this is Masculine Monday, where we talk about all things manly.
But before we can really get to what's manly, we feel like we need to go over a little bit of things that have crept into Christianity and brought this idea of manly or biblical manliness we've seen on the internet by some very popular authors. And we're trying to maybe reclaim it back into actually being biblical instead of idealistic.
A lot of times, when we think in our society about what makes somebody manly or masculine, we think of very much a Greek idea, the Greek gods and titans and gladiators and superheroes and these big, bulky muscles, and they never cry, and they've got all of the women and all of these weird kind of mentalities. And this idea has also crept into Christianity with biblical manhood.
The Greeks had this idea, a group they called the Stoics, which were very stone faced, which were very no emotion, and somehow that made you more intelligent and a better man than others.
And a lot of times, the mentality of the Stoics also came down to the way that they treated women, and the way that they viewed women, that they were somehow supposed to be kind of out of sight, out of mind, and only good for creating babies. And usually, it wasn't even the sex part, it was just creating babies. It's the only
Hopefully,
thing they were
male
good for. Yeah,
babies.
hopefully male babies, yeah.
This is a problem that we find in some of the ancient cultures, but it really comes up on our radar with the Greeks because the Greeks were such a conqueror in their age that, or in the age of the Jesus time and such, that it has progressed into our modern age and brought or dragged along a lot of the same mentalities and a lot of the faulty thinking that came from that. We now call it a part of our modern culture, but we need to know where it comes from and can we dig it out? And if we dig it out, is there something else to fill the place that brings a better picture?
So, with ancient cultures, I'm sure that it existed before Greece. However, um, when the gospel went out beyond just Judea and into the courts of the Gentiles, a lot of the Gentiles have been schooled in the Hellenized Greek thought. And so a couple centuries down the road, you have the Roman Catholics, and you have, by this point, a lot of Greek thinkers who are reading the New Testament and reading the Old Testament, and they're putting their Greek thoughts into it. And so with various saints of the early church, whether it's Augustine or his disciple Jerome, or it's John Chrysostom, or it's Saint Thomas Aquinas, all of these men are taking their thoughts from Aristotle and Socrates and these other Greek philosophers who were very much outside of what God considers to be manliness, and they're trying to put those philosophical ideas into the text of the Bible.
We also find that in our modern day Christianity that there once again people who are reading the text, they're reading the Bible, and then they're interpreting it with um, their cultural bent on it. And we're not going back and finding out what the Bible says for itself, and we're not finding out that like Hebraic idea that's coming out of the Bible. Instead, we're trying to be maybe so modern that we're totally missing the point. And when we're modern, it's like how the Bible says, like the grass springs up and it blooms with flowers and then it withers away and the flowers are gone completely. What is the point of that? But when we have something with deep roots, like going back to an ancient people like the Hebrews and the Hebraic culture, then we're starting to drink of something very enriching and long lasting, something that we can pass on and it's not going to become outdated.
So when we've been talking here previously in a lot of the previous videos, we've been discussing how there are two wisdoms at play. There's the wisdom of God and the wisdom of the principalities and powers. And in fact, last Monday we put out a video on sonship, and this was really discussing both the two wisdoms and also this Zion and Babylon sort of interplay, and how we as sons are to know from whence we've come. It's the same thing with trying to figure out what is masculinity, what is manliness. if our thinking comes from the principalities which do desire these big grandiose temples and massive everything, then our thinking's going to be very skewed. But for the God who is humble, for the God who cares about the family, for the God who wants to bring all of the members of the family back into the family, for the God who cares about his wife, his God being the husband of one bride. I mean, these are the things that really show forth what manliness really is about.
So, to really just grab onto the picture real quick of what's happening with a more Hebraic understanding, is in the beginning of Genesis, we see that as a people, as humans, we are created in the image and likeness of God.
Yes.
Now, we were really challenged a few years ago when we heard a preacher say that we feel heartbreak and we feel disappointment because God feels it, because he's already felt it.
Right.
And that's why it's in our lives. But so often we think, like, how can God understand heartbreak and disappointment? How can he understand struggles? But when we start to change that around and look that we face struggles because God allows himself to go through struggles, even though he's God and he doesn't have to, but the relationship that he allows opens himself for heartbreak, for disappointment, for hurt, for struggles, and he continues through it. So we feel that if you can look at how God has created us in his image and likeness, then we start to pinpoint a little more of what manliness is, just according to the Bible, and without bending our modern views in there as well.
And so this also is going to get back to, we have to understand what it even means to be human before we can start to understand male and female, because there's so much that has been lost to us, that God creating us in his own image and creating Adam from the clay, and there's a certain purpose and a certain quality that God has given the man and woman together, that it's not just simply the man was created in his image, but in his image he created them, male and female. That's actually the last part of the verse, and we can't ignore that.
So when we look at an image of manliness and we're thinking like big and strong and fearless, God does display those things, but he doesn't keep himself there to express himself as God. He openly admits throughout the Bible that my heart is breaking, that I'm disappointed, that I'm hurt, that I'm angry. God has all the emotions. He has experienced the whole vast array, and we're not living in a different place where God can't understand our emotions. And to explain it to us further, God then sent a Messiah, a promised one. And so, one way that God continues to explain this to us is that God sent a Messiah, a promised one, who brings the restoration of all things. And through him, Jesus comes and he experiences everything about human life. He experiences having dirty feet. He experiences the growing up in the awkward stages. He experiences the emotions, the surrendering, the sweat, blood, and tears. Jesus, in a human form, experienced the whole things, so that once again, there's no reason for us to go to God and say, you don't understand how I feel. You don't understand this struggle. Because he's already understood it at the first, and then he showed us the second time how he understands it.
When we spend time reading the Bible, I was caught up this last time reading through 1st and 2nd Samuel with the character David. We think of David as like this manly man, this man of war. He was able to conquer Jerusalem with just a few hundred. He had the 300 mighty men, from which we have incredible stories. But something that caught me with David is, even though he does seem to display what we would think of as being like really manly, he also displays this very tenderheartedness, this very, he wasn't afraid to cry, he wasn't afraid to lament before God, he wasn't afraid to show his emotions and live them out fully. So This is something that I think we really need to re-embrace as men, is that emotions are not necessarily a negative thing. And a lot of men like to hide their emotions and say, well, we're thinkers, we're not feelers. But the truth is, God gave us emotion because he himself feels. And if we cannot fully embrace those emotions and fully live them out in a way that's holistic and in a way that's healthy, then we are not being fully human, and we are certainly not being manly.
One thing that happens, we get accused that if we have emotions, that our emotions are controlling us. And that happens with men and women, boys and girls. If you have emotions, they might be controlling you. I actually have run into this in Christianity a lot, where they want to tell you your feelings mean nothing. And I'm like, that's really not how God operates. That's really not the example that God's given us. It's not that it means nothing, and it's not that it means everything. God has given us a balance to work with it together. But if we're constantly always ignoring it or feeling in our emotions mean everything, then either way, we're going to be getting really off centered of who we're meant to be and what kind of creation God has made us and made us for.
And it's really ironic to me. There's this idea that somebody who is emotional is not going to be a very good leader because they're going to be going off of their emotions instead of off of rationality. But it's the ironic part for me isn't necessarily even that thinking, although it's wrong. It's that you've then got these people who are rational who then go off of their greed or their lust or other things that are also pitfalls. And so it's not like if you don't have emotion, then you're not going to be a good leader, because there are so many other things that really fall into it.
So often we find with manliness, there's this idea of almost the Lone Ranger, the superhero who's going to go off and he's going to take care of everything and then he'll be right back. We have the man going out and hunting and gathering and bringing back supplies. And in it, there's, whether accidental or not, there's this image of a man, and being very manly means you can go out by yourself and conquer. And the image we get in the Bible is that God didn't want for man to be alone. And even though God was right there to be relational with man, he created someone for man to have a more similar bonding, so that essentially you could almost learn bonding like right here, then you can learn it like here with God and get into some bigger things too. The thing is, as humans in general, this is still something we struggle with, is that we all have this idea, whether it's because we're super strong or super scared, that we think we can get isolated, and after we fix ourselves all up, then maybe like other people will like us and they'll accept us and they'll bring us in, and then we'll be communal, and then we can relate, and then we can be in relationships. But when God created us in his image and his likeness, we believe in Christianity that God is a triune God. There's always community there. There's always relationship there. So when he created us in his image and likeness, he created us so that we're meant to be people who are communal, who are relational, who are kindred spirits looking for that other kindred spirit. You do have that deep calling to deep. And sometimes that relational experience brings out emotion. And if we're always ignoring it, then there's no way of knowing how to deal with it.
So with the wisdom of God, part of the wisdom of God is relationality, hitting on that God is triune. There's the community within the Godhead himself, but then there's also this other deeper component where because he's relational, therefore he created. It just makes sense with the way that his mind works. So in creating, one of the things that we realize is that in creating the creation and creating humanity, this is not another aspect of the Godhead. He's creating something that's very distinct from himself, and yet somehow he's able to commune with them in a very deep, deep going unto deep sort of way. With male and female, we again see this kind of, some would put opposites, black and white, male and female, Jew and Gentile, but there's a coming together, there's a unification, there's a relating unto each other in a deeper way than just simply being friends because we get along. There's something deep within that which is God that is very much a tender, loving care that is expressed through the being the servant of all and caring for the little children and showing himself as one who has compassion upon the poor and the compassion upon the ones who have no voice. There's something just inherent within the character of God that expresses itself in this way that really draws even those who seem like they should be opposed to God. So part of being manly, this expression of God's character, it's to show that weakness is strong in God. It's to show that foolishness is wise in God, that those things that we consider to be weak, tenderness, love, compassion, caring for the poor, caring for the sick, these things that we see as weak traits as in manliness are actually the strongest traits. Tears that we think are signs of like, I guess, weakness and foolishness and emotionalism. We find that there's actually great strength, great power in tears. This is the wisdom of God being expressed, and when it's expressed because it's the wisdom of God and not simply some sort of hysteria, that is a strength that draws, and people cannot help but turn aside to see and ask the question of, why is it that this is completely opposite to everything that I've been taught?
And yet it seems so in line with what our spirits say is strong and is powerful. We learn a culture that teaches us a false dichotomy that we don't live up to. And when we try to, it's like it's killing something inside of us. We're trying to take on images that weren't meant for us. We weren't meant to be molded into these images. But when we see something of God's heart starting to come through communing with one another, through reading the Bible, through searching for what is God's heart, even though we've spent all this time thinking that we probably already have a really good concept of what God's heart is and what God wants. But when we start to search for that and we realize our identities and our self-worth and our future depends on knowing what God's heart is, then something's changing. Then it becomes personal, but not in a way that we're just benefiting ourselves. Because when we see God as compassionate and tender, we see God as the Father of all comfort, and we're made in His image and His likeness. Yeah. It's not just Jesus Christ bringing us into this whole different world where we've never heard of it before, but this is actually where we were born from, and we've been gone so long. But now God's bringing us back in, and there's something in our spirits that's saying, yeah, this seems right. Yeah, that seems like where I should be.
And this is something that's so key to comprehend, is that when God created humanity, when He formed Adam and He created Eve, and they said, she is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, there was no sin there. There was no imperfection there. God created pure. God created in His image at the first. People talk about sin, nature, and depravity. There's multiple terms about it, but this is a secondary thing. This is not what God created humanity as. So even though we would consider a sin nature or a depravity, the whole reasoning needs to be governed by God created man pure first. And because He created man pure first, there's something deep within every single human being that's going to register with that first initial core of who they are and what they were created to be.
The originality. In Christianity, when we look and search into Christianity, we find some really beautiful, great components. but those components are still being explained to us through very Greek influenced terms and modern day terms. But when we go even further back and we start to see something not just Judaic but Hebraic, those ancient roots all
Mm-hmm.
the way back there, then we start to realize like there was an original before the original. And it's the same thing that's happening. And it's that same thing we need to be searching for, like the very basic core possible, so that we can connect and build on that foundation.
And this is something that is, I guess I can use the word poisoning, the concept of biblical manliness. That we mentioned that there are famous speakers who go through this, and when you read kind of their commentary or the way that they're explaining Genesis 1 through 3, you read what they're saying, and it's very different than what Genesis 1 through 3 actually says. It's almost like they rewrote it just so that their theology could fit into it. And that kind of mentality comes from the Greeks. It comes from the principalities and powers, that wisdom. It doesn't come from realizing and recognizing from whence we've come, that God created us first pure. It comes from a completely different theology.
A very secondary culture. Um, but trying to strip it back even further to get to that original core and find out the heart of God. Um, we really don't need better Christians. We don't need people being more faithful to church services, church tithing. And I know that makes me such a heretic to say so, but it's okay, because all I'm interested is that people become interested in being the people of God. And to be the people of God, we need to reflect the characters, the images, and the priorities that God has.
So we encourage you to continue in your search of what it means to be a man according to the Bible. And if you're a woman, then what it means to be a woman according to the Bible. Going back to the roots, going back to what God has created us to be, finding out what it means to be human, and from there, what does it mean to be a man, a woman. Restoring again the ancient boundary stones. And as you continue to do this, we also are going to continue to build upon what we've already said and continue to reveal these things as we understand. We're going to continue to search with you. So please join us in this messy and unclean searching together.